Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Sumner, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar entitled Unlocking Opportunities: How the BVI's International Finance Center Can Empower Chinese Businesses in the Post-Pandemic Landscape. I am also here as a representative of the Appleby Investment Group, formerly known as China Offshore, an organization whose core purpose is to enable the globalization of corporate and personal legacies by providing the best connectivity in the market between overseas providers and Chinese intermediaries. Recognized as one of the leading financial centers in the world, the British Virgin Islands, BVI, has played an increasingly important role in the global economic landscape, facilitating cross-border trade, investment, and finance. The BVI's core principles of agility and evolution have stayed firm and sustainable during global challenges. The jurisdiction has a high level of international cooperation relating to transparency, regulation, and compliance standards, and offers a hugely appealing, stable, and reliable framework for businesses and investors. You will find out today how IFCs can facilitate cross-border investments, promote trade, and help Chinese businesses navigate the evolving global landscape. Special focus will be given to the British Virgin Islands IFC and the advantages it can offer Chinese businesses seeking to expand internationally. Valuable insights will be provided for businesses and investors looking to capitalize on the opportunities presented in the post-pandemic landscape. As you were informed upon your registration, this webinar is being held in both Chinese and English simultaneously. If you need to change your language settings, you can do so at the bottom of your Zoom app. 我们今天的在线活动是有双语中文和英文的一个通传翻译。如果你是要切换你的语言设置，你可以在你的 Zoom 的下面的一个按钮可以选择你喜欢听的语言。At the end of the Q&A, at the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A. A number of you may have submitted questions, so we will handle those if you have done so. And if you have any questions during the panel, please make sure you put your questions in the Q&A window. It's also a separate button on the Zoom application. And for time that we have left, we will certainly use that to answer any questions live. If you have any questions that are individual or personal that you would like to have addressed from one of the lawyers present, then please also send those to your Outbound Investment Group representative, and we'll connect you with the team who is here on the webinar with us today. So today we're going to cover a few topics, the first being capital and risk management, digital transformation, how IFCs can facilitate cross-border investments, promote trade, and help Chinese businesses navigate the evolving global landscapes. We're going to talk about the BVI IFC and the advantages it offers to Chinese businesses looking to expand internationally, and also the importance of fostering collaboration and partnerships between Chinese businesses and international stakeholders, and also measures that the IFCs themselves can take to create a more conducive environment for business growth in the post-pandemic landscape. So first, I would like to introduce our four panelists that we have on the webinar here with us today. The first being Paul Trewartha, who's a partner of Mourant in Hong Kong. He's a partner of the aforementioned firm in the banking and finance team. He has more than 15 years of experience in the Asia-Pacific region. He primarily advises on structured finance trades, debt capital markets, issuances, and margin loans, as well as a broad spectrum of cross-border transactions, including asset finance, in particular aviation and shipping, fund financing, acquisition, and leverage finance of general corporate lending. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Next, Vicky Lord, who's the managing partner of Harneys, Shanghai. She's the managing partner of the Shanghai office, offering in the People's Republic of China, and is a highly regarded litigator in cross-border commercial cases in the British Virgin Islands and Cayman Islands. As head in the China litigation, insolvency, and restructuring team, she obtained significant wins for clients acting as a litigator in ultra-high value, high-profile BVI and Cayman commercial disputes with cross-border elements. She often acts as a specialist BVI and Cayman litigation co-counsel for PRC and US listed companies for IPOs in contentious scenarios. Vicky is an experienced advocate in insolvency, restructuring, distressed hedge fund litigation, and shareholder disputes. Welcome, Vicky.
早上好.
Our next speaker, Ellie Crespi, she is the managing partner of Collas Crill BVI. She's the managing partner of their BVI office and also heads up the corporate finance and funds team. She practices BVI and Cayman law and advises on all elements of corporate capital markets and banking transactions, as well as restructurings. Her experience practicing and living in Western Europe, the CIS, Asia, and the Caribbean brings a nuanced cultural understanding to complex cross-border transactions with global stakeholders. Welcome, Ellie.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
And finally, Fiona Chan, who is a partner of Appleby. She's a partner in the corporate department of Appleby's Hong Kong office, leading the banking and finance practice in the Hong Kong office, as well as Appleby's technology and innovation group in Asia. Fiona has over 20 years of offshore and onshore experience in the Asian market and advises on the laws of Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, and Cayman Islands. Her broad offshore law practice spans banking and finance transactions, including acquisition, leverage and project financing, privatization financing, shipping and aircraft financing, structured products, fund financing, crypto digital financing, non-contentious insurances, bond issuance, and restructuring of corporates and financial institutions. Welcome, Fiona.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning. So I'd like to jump straight in with our first question. I'd like to know from the panelists how the BVI's International Finance Center has evolved its services and offerings to cater to the specific needs of Chinese businesses in the post-pandemic era. And Ellie, I think you were going to start us off today.
Thank you, Matthew. I think there are three things I'd like to speak to here. And the first, if we wind back to the beginning of the pandemic, was just how brilliant BVI was as a jurisdiction in responding to lockdown and the onset of the pandemic by immediately taking all of the courts online. Now, of course, we had something of a dry run exercise for this back in 2017 when Hurricane Irma came and ravaged the BVI. But needless to say, come pandemic time, whilst other jurisdictions, much bigger and more mature jurisdictions than ours, were scrambling around to continue to offer financial services to their customers, clients, and investors worldwide, we were able to go straight online with the BVI courts. The Virgin system was equally responsive. It's a state-of-the-art system. We have fully digital searches, which meant that apart from the fact that we were all sitting at home rather than being in our offices, we were all able to do business with the BVI in the normal way. And finally, and I apologise to Vicky in advance if I'm stealing a litigation point, but I do think it's probably worth also drawing out the recent amendments to the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court Act, which legislated for standalone interim relief in support of foreign proceedings, including in Hong Kong and the PRC.
Thank you, Ellie. And I believe, Fiona, you had a few points that you wanted to add on this question.
Yes, Matthew, thank you. Totally agree with what Ellie has just said. And I just want to follow up and highlight on one of the points relating to searches. Now, particularly for us, from our perspective, being based out here in Asia, for Chinese clients, a very key concern is our ability to provide services for urgent completion of transactions at really short notice. It happens all the time. Everything is done in a rush. So the BVI has done particularly well in this regard, and it's already implemented, as Ellie mentioned, Virgin, which is the very efficient online search system that enables registered users like law firms like ourselves to conduct searches in real time without any need to resort to any person doing it physically in the BVI. So during the pandemic period, where people around the world were obviously, sometimes unable to attend to the office or, just simply to work all together, we have had issues with some other jurisdictions where we had to literally wait for their offices to reopen or to wait for certain staff to be back on duty so that we can get the search results. By comparison, we have never had any problems with the BVI because their technology is just there. They've just got the system, up and running. And I've had feedbacks from Chinese clients to say that, they are really appreciative of the services offered by the BVI so that they can complete transactions in a rush or, not even in a rush, just in a normal way during the pandemic. So that was kind of a very huge bonus points for the BVI.
Perfect. Yeah, those are very good points, and especially when everything is running smoothly and everything is going according to plan. Of course, you can expect an international financial center would work well, but I think what makes one financial center stand out above head and shoulders above others is when in the time of crisis or in the time we need access to courts or the registry, etc. That the IFC is ready to be there for its investors and stakeholders, under all circumstances. So I think those are very good points to start out with. So thank you for that. I'd like to move on to the next question, which is, what are some of the key advantages of using the BVI IFC for Chinese businesses seeking to expand internationally? And how do these benefits maybe compare with other IFCs? Paul, I think you are going to lead this question.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a great question. And the BVI has a number of advantages, which I'm sure all our panelists are going to want to discuss. But I think primarily there is a simple benefit of the fact that BVI companies and BVI structures have been used in China for the past 30 years, used in China and in Asia. So what that means is that you have professionals, people, lawyers, banks, bankers, financial institutions, even courts in Asia. They're all very familiar with the BVI entities and the structures, and they become comfortable using these entities within their corporate structures. They understand and appreciate the benefits that come with the robust rule of law in the jurisdiction and the availability of professionals to help them drive transactions and to drive their corporate structures. And primarily as well, it's the quick turnaround that these service providers can offer and deliver on receiving instructions. That infrastructure is world-class and it's difficult to be matched by other IFCs. One of the key uses of BVI companies in China and in Asia is to facilitate the execution of cross-border transactions. And the professional and independent infrastructure base, both in the BVI and here in Hong Kong, in China, and Asia more broadly, I'm thinking of Singapore, certainly enables that. I think if I was going to put it on a more tangible level, the three key advantages to my mind for using a BVI entity are the tax neutrality benefits. The BVI doesn't impose any corporate tax, income tax, capital gains or wealth tax on companies or trusts. So accordingly, where your corporate group may have a BVI element, that BVI company is not going to add an additional layer of tax to your corporate structure as a result of BVI tax impositions. That's obviously really important. The second point is the modern and flexible business companies law, the legislative regime. It regularly undergoes reform and updates to ensure that it remains cutting edge, pragmatic, and compliant with world best practices. Two examples here. For instance, when it comes to the appointment of directors to a BVI company, there are no residency requirements that are legislated in the BVI for those directors. Other IFCs do have a form of residency requirement, be it for directors or secretaries. And so it's important to note that BVI doesn't have that. That's really handy. Likewise, when it comes to banks and other private capital lenders, some of the key benefits of the BVI legislative regime and in particular the BVI Business Companies Act are the fact that it includes a simple and effective security registration mechanism to allow public filings to be made with the BVI Registrar of Corporate Affairs. And that offers and affords a statutory priority to the chargee in those instances. And I think it's important to think about this from both sides of the coin. It obviously provides a lot of protection for lenders and for banks. But what it also does is it makes the corporate group, which includes BVI elements, BVI companies, makes it more attractive for those lenders and financial institutions to lend into and to take security from. Most IFCs will have an internal registration mechanism. This BVI element this BVI mechanism for a public filing and a public registration of those security interests is something which isn't matched in all other IFCs. So it sets a BVI apart in that system. And I think finally, and again, with apologies to Vicky if I am stealing her thunder here, it should be repeated though, the court system. The BVI legal system is a well-developed common law legal system, which has a highly respected commercial court. And the final level of appeal is to the Privy Council in London. That commercial court has a reputation for delivering well thought out, well considered, high quality judgments. And importantly, for this part of the world, as Fiona mentioned, everything it's done on a commercial time frame, and that's important here. So this ensures that the BVI has a good reputation of consistent judgments for commercial disputes and provides a reliability for all participants. I think these three things together provide business certainty, and business thrives on certainty. So these things can be factored in when participants are conducting transactions with BVI companies or in the BVI. And more importantly, the fact that it has an English, has a common law system, has a law system based on the English common law, has that highly respected commercial court, and the professional services infrastructure that I spoke about earlier. Not only can that certainty be factored in, but it can also be priced in. So there aren't cost blowouts or anticipated cost blowouts. So that reliability is a key factor.
Fantastic. That was very comprehensive. Thank you, Paul. And I think there was maybe another comment from Ellie. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I don't know. I feel like I should offer Paul a job. That was excellent. Very comprehensive. I suppose, Matthew, if we're speaking about how the BVI compares against other IFCs and competitor jurisdictions, I would like to mention commitment. Let's recognize the fact that the BVI and China have been business partners for 3 decades now. And all of the major and important legislators and foundation builders of BVI financial services have traveled out to China and met people and spoken to them and listened and built a partnership. And that partnership includes memoranda of understanding with cities like Tianjin, Shenzhen, and Hangzhou. And it's a partnership that continues this day through BVI Asia.
I was just going to add that, and I was speaking with Elise earlier this year, and she reminded me that actually the BVI House Asia has been up for 10 years now. So it's actually been a decade that BVI has actually had a office. The BVI IFC has had an office in the Far East, in Hong Kong, and I understand certain facilities can be conducted through the BVI House Asia based in the same exact time zone. And if you want to talk about, service coverage, literally, we have practitioners who are on the call now from BVI all the way to Hong Kong and Shanghai. So literally you have 24 access to BVI professionals who are, available in every time zone in the world, and at, partner level of service. So that's not something that I think most jurisdictions can offer, especially the regional support with having its own government office right in the People's Republic of China, or the Greater People's Republic of China. So that's fantastic. The next thing I wanted to cover was a little bit about how BVI's IFC has facilitated cross-border investments and business transactions between China and other jurisdictions, particularly in terms of tax efficiency, legal structures, and the ease of doing business. Paul, I think you wanted to lead off this question.
Yeah, as Ellie mentioned, I think the BVI has been involved for 3 decades and partnering with China and Chinese businesses in terms of inbound investment and outbound investment. The facilitation of these types of transactions is something that I think can be put down to three things, or more than 3 things, but certainly 3 key ones are to do with the speed that the BVI service providers are able to act out on instructions. Take incorporation, for example, a BVI business company can usually be incorporated within 2 business days once the KYC elements have all been completed. That can be really, really handy in circumstances where time is of the essence, when new entities need to go into a corporate structure. But further to this, I think the BVI also offers simple and straightforward and speedy abilities to appoint directors and also to remove directors, to issue new shares to incoming shareholders, and also to transfer those shares to a third party. And also the ability to amend a company's constitutional documents. These are all things which can slow down a process, but the BVI has these processes and under BVI law, which make it very simple and straightforward, which is really effective. I think another way that BVI has facilitated these types of transactions between China and other jurisdictions are the fact that BVI companies can be incorporated with broad purposes and unlimited and objectives which are unlimited. This is, and for a range of purposes. And accordingly, a third party who transacts with a BVI business company can generally be assured that the validity of that transaction, and that it's not going to be set aside as a result of a lack of capacity, authority. These features are particular assistance and of importance for operating companies which need to borrow funds, grant security, enter into exotic derivatives, pursue ESG agendas, or green initiatives, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about later. Equally, a BVI company can, if it's commercially required, it provides mechanisms to restrict the objects of a company. So I'm speaking here in particular about a particularly unique BVI unique type of entity called a restricted purposes company. This is a vehicle which can provide great comfort for creditors who want transactional certainty. The key feature of this type of restricted purposes company is that it can only lawfully undertake transactions which are strictly within or incidental to its specified purpose. That specified purpose must be set out in the M&A of a restricted purposes company, an RPC, including the fact that it is an RPC itself. The key point to note is that any transaction that is undertaken by an RPC, which is not within or incidental to that specified purpose, it's going to be void. So, like I said, this is going to provide tremendous comfort for investors or lenders who might want to be concerned, who might be concerned about the directors of a standard company, not necessarily a BVI company, but a standard company, undertaking activities that are going to be detrimental to their position, or that might negatively impact a security package that a lender has obtained in a financing. We've recently seen RPCs utilised by large multinational corporates to provide comfort to lenders where that BVI entity has held highly fluid assets that can be easily disposed of, but in respect of which there are restrictions on the ability to take security over those assets. So that restricted purpose, that specified restricted purpose, limits the ability of that RPC to dispose of those assets, which will provide comfort to the lenders in circumstances where they can't take security. So I think the point here is just that the BVI product offering provides a great deal of flexibility. And I'm just going to finish up quickly saying that one other simple point, it shouldn't be overlooked. It is very simple, but companies can be registered using foreign legal character names, Chinese names. It's obviously alongside an English name, but it certainly helps from a cultural perspective, I think in one respect.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Paul. And Ellie, I believe you had a few points you want to add here.
Thanks, Matthew. I worked in Asia for 9 years, and I remember very clearly what I called the 3 degrees of urgency, which were urgent, very urgent, and super top urgent. So just to reflect a little bit on those very sensible points that Paul just made, I think it's worth briefly adding that we do have an certain express transactions that can be submitted through Virgin. So, for example, multi-company merger or M&A amendments can now be done on a same-day basis at the BVI registry. The point I really wanted to pick up here, Matthew, was tax efficiency. So we get a little bit of heat as an international financial centre sometimes around tax issues, but in fact all we are is very simply a tax neutral jurisdiction that doesn't try to steal the tax revenues of the countries that we partner with when we do business. So putting a BVI entity into a transaction means that the investors setting up the transaction are not going to pay an additional layer of tax on top of the taxes that they'll be paying wherever they are in the world. And there have been very many studies, and a particularly good one recently by Mark Pragnell, that point to how much tax revenue is actually generated via BVI companies globally.
It's a very interesting point. That's fantastic. And I think so between the tax neutrality and I would say either the very broad or very flexible, scope of business that a BVI company could conduct, or a very narrow scope, if that's what the people who have set up the entity want. I think the point is that it's tax neutral, it's flexible, and it's really an ideal platform to conduct all different types of transactions and create all different types of structures, because the BVI is there to facilitate business, not to restrict business or to overly tax business. So its goal, it's a tool. It's just say it's a toolkit for international, creating international business and structures. So I think you both summarized that very well. I want to move on to our next point. So number 4 question I had for today was, I'd like to know, in what ways does the BVI IFC support Chinese businesses in managing risks, specifically related to regulatory compliance, asset protection, and corporate governance? And I believe, Paul, you were going to kick off the answer to this question.
Yeah, I think there's a number of key benefits for directors and managers of a BVI company, and I spoke earlier about the fact that there's no residency requirements on BVI directors. I won't repeat that, but what I will talk about is the fact that there's also no, when it comes to corporate governance, there's no requirement to hold director meetings within the islands. Director meetings can be held electronically. There's no requirement to hold any of them. There's no requirement to have a frequency of meetings within the BVI. So they can be held over the telephone, electronically, on a Zoom call like we're on here now. Didn't we all love those over COVID? So there's obviously an ease of corporate governance and an ease of use factor there, which is really important. And I think when it comes to regulatory compliance, I spoke earlier about the professional services support that exists around BVI entities. If there is assistance that's going to be required, be it for economic substance with FATCA or CRS regulations, with the automatic exchange of information requirements, the depth of support and understanding of the BVI legal system that we have here in Asia, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and other areas, in China itself. We have representatives on this panel, for instance, from 4 law firms, all of which have experience in Asia, and 3 of which are currently based in Asia. So the depth and support of availability of highly skilled professionals to support companies, support directors on their regulatory compliance is immense. And the BVI government has done a wonderful job of supporting the depth of that professional services industry in Asia, and also ensuring that it's a truly independent service community.
Fantastic. And I think one of the things that you said this on the previous question, but it's very important, the requirement to have directors who are locally based or not at all, other jurisdictions. So that's a layer of cost. That's a layer of cost, and depending how many BVI or other structures are in the group of companies, that can add up to significant amounts of money on an annual basis. And in addition to that, the requirement to have meetings. So just imagine, a whole group of directors or stakeholders had to fly, to the BVI or to fly to any IFC in the world, for that matter. If you're conducting global business, in terms of time, in terms of costs, in terms of just arranging for those things to take place, that's certainly a restrictive. That could be very restrictive depending on where everyone is based. So those are very important points. Thank you. And I believe, Vicky, you had a few points that you wanted to add to this.
I think from a corporate governance perspective, there are some quite unique things about BVI companies that are really attractive to my clients here in mainland China. We quite often see clients using BVI companies for joint venture vehicles. That's quite a popular choice. And one of the reasons is because, of course, of the flexibility of the Business Companies Act. The Business Companies Act, it imposes directors' duties, but one of the unique features is that you can disapply the part of the director's duties, in the sense that a director can vote for their appointing shareholder in a JV scenario if the M&A has been amended to provide for that. Now, that gives a lot of flexibility. It gives a lot of comfort for individuals who are taking on those roles within the company, attending those board meetings, cognizant, that what they're doing, in terms of a JV, may well be in the interest of an appointing shareholder, and it really removes that worry that they can have, which might arise if you were to structure with a different vehicle in a different jurisdiction. That's taken away. So it's that unique flexibility that can arise that BVI brings, that has meant that it's been so popular amongst my clients. One aspect I did want to really talk to was in terms of asset protection. I don't know how many people on the call went through the lockdown here in China. For me, in Shanghai, it was a real time for reflection and understanding what's important. And that, I think, was true for a lot of my clients. There was a renewed reflection and realization that, spending all day with your family, it actually was important. And perhaps we do spend too much time working all of the hours of the day here in the PRC to deliver for our clients. But actually, we ought to put a renewed focus on our families. That has, in fact, led, I think, to a focus amongst the clients on succession planning, on asset protection, that has materialized kind of within the pandemic, and then following on from that post-pandemic. And to that extent, there's been a real interest in working out how to look after best the family fortunes or your personal wealth. And they have turned to BVI to address those needs. That has meant that, in fact, what we're seeing is an increased use of BVI for the formation of trust vehicles. So we see that in a number of ways. You can see that either with the family business being put into, where you're using a BVI company, considering how to put that into trust so that you have that succession planning tool without having to go through the rigmarole of, probate or perhaps disputes that might arise post, the head of the family sadly passing on. And so clients are really keen to use BVI for that. And we also see that in a commercial context, where perhaps you have founders who are looking to perhaps IPO a company. They're putting their shares into BVI vehicles because those vehicles are flexible, cost effective, and we have that certainty that everyone has spoken to in terms of the court system and certainty of the law. In particular, there are some structures where clients will want to use a private trust company, PTC, and that has been quite important for clients because it allows them to effectively incorporate into the BVI a company with a limited business purpose to act as a trustee for a specific trust or related group of related trusts in specific circumstances without a license, and permits those individuals to retain some degree of control but without perhaps some of the risks that come with having too much control in your typical offshore discretionary trust structure. My clients are often quite shocked when we talk about trusts that it does mean, you are disposing of your assets, you are giving them away. And the PTC gives them a lot of comfort in terms of a structure to be able to achieve that without perhaps losing complete control of what they see as, the fruits of some very hard work over the years. And so if it's done properly and done properly by professionals with all the correct formalities, the person settling those assets into a PTC and their family are able to retain a certain degree of control and involvement without actually prejudicing the trust itself. So you get the benefit as well. And in addition to that, we've also got Vista. Vista trusts, again, specifically designed to hold shares in the BVI company, and where the trustee effectively will be disengaged, i.e. without the liability in relation to assessing the underlying entity in respect of management responsibility, so that the underlying company and its business can be retained and run as the directors see fit, so without the interference of a trustee, because they're not obliged and therefore not liable to have that kind of hands-on day-to-day running of the operations of the underlying business that you might get otherwise. Again, that has proved to be very popular amongst the clients who, when they come to me, they're saying, we want to continue to have the discretion to be able to run the business. We've done a good job so far. We don't want it to suddenly go to somebody sat somewhere else in the BVI telling us what to do. Although I must say the BVI trustees that we work with on the fiduciary side out of BVI, again, highly professional, know what they're doing, and do an excellent job when they are looking at that offshore discretionary trust. And so really, in terms of asset protection, that is something we've seen post pandemic, that need to really ensure the future for generations to come, and really underlying the importance of family and succession that has seen a renewed resurgence following that extensive lockdown that we all went through here in China.
Thank you. That was very extensive, Vicky. And I think if I could sum it up in just a few words, especially in times of uncertainty, like what the Chinese, well, the whole world, but China being through some of the harshest lockdowns, is they want predictability. And if you can just imagine if the head of the family had passed away because of COVID, and no preparations had been made, and having to deal with probate and having to deal with those things, which to a certain extent, there are some uncertainties, depending on where the assets are and depending on, who the shareholders and the family members and, what are their rights to those assets. So having that level of clarity and predictability and I would say the precedence of how all those things are dealt with in the BVI, if it's set up properly, then that should give a lot of assurance to the beneficiaries and the company directors and people who are involved in running the family businesses. So that's a very important point, especially just being through one of the craziest times probably in modern history, where the whole world was locked down at various levels for up to nearly 3 years. So thank you for highlighting that, Vicky. That was very comprehensive. I'd like to move directly on to the next point. We have about 21 minutes left, and we're just shy of being halfway through what we prepared to discuss with the audience today. And Vicky, I think this was a point that you wanted to talk about as well. How do you see BVI's IFC commitment to transparency, information exchange, and anti-money laundering measures contribute its attractiveness as a hub for Chinese businesses and investors? I think we've touched on it a little bit, but if you want to expand any more, that would be a good time.
Yeah, sure. I'll try and keep it short, given how long we have left. But basically, BVI is obviously in compliance with international standards. You can see that from where we have the calls for action from the Financial Action Task Force, and that certainly gives you confidence, because you know that the regulator is going to be following it closely in BVI. That means that the professionals there will be up to speed, and that the BVI companies, through their registered agents, are going to be in line with those international standards. So what does that mean? I think that translates to reassurance for people who are doing business with BVI companies, and the practical impact is that makes it easier for you to get financing from the banks using a BVI vehicle, perhaps as a guarantor or perhaps as the borrower in financing transactions. That the financial institutions are comfortable with the jurisdiction, and because of that level of compliance with international standards, and that's obviously going to make your transactions easier, more cost effective and smoother from a client perspective.
Yeah, that's a very important point, because especially for, let's just say the beneficiary or the person using a BVI company or a BVI trust or what have you, there's a lot of words that are thrown around by the OECD and the various let's just say international regulatory bodies, FATF, etc. And so practically speaking, what does that mean if a jurisdiction is seen as compliant or largely compliant, or has been thrown onto various black, white, gray lists? And what does that mean, practically speaking? And I think, what you're saying or alluding to, Vicky, is that a jurisdiction that falls out of compliance, by, whose ever standard, the OECD, FATF, etc., you may be excluded from certain parts of the financial system, or certain, banks or financial institutions or creditors or lenders won't want to do business because of that. And if you're in a jurisdiction that is compliant and maintains its regulatory, regime on international standards, then you can be rest assured that you're going to be included and your business won't be interfered with. And that's super, super important. So thank you for highlighting that, Vicky. I'd like to move on to the next question now. So could someone share some examples of successful Chinese businesses or projects that have benefited specifically from the services provided by the BVI IFC? And what do you think some of those key factors contributing to their success were? Paul, I think you were going to kick this one off, actually.
Yeah, I'll try and move through this relatively quickly. I'm a structured finance lawyer, so I'm going to draw from that world. But over the past 18 months and maybe even 2 years, we've seen a number of transactions involving directors of listed companies or founders, key shareholders of listed companies, who are looking to monetize the shares that they own and control in those listed companies. And these are typically Chinese, directors or founders of Chinese businesses who've set up the business and ultimately along the way listed the company. And that can be either on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange or even on the NASDAQ. But these people typically have a significant amount of their personal wealth tied up through stock ownership and payment benefit, equity payment-based plans. And there's different drivers as to why individuals might look at utilizing these assets to monetize these assets. And one of the ways that they can do that is to either enter into a form of an equity derivative, being a collar or a prepaid variable forward, or alternatively through a structured margin loan. And these have been proven to be really popular during the COVID years, where there's been volatility or perceived volatility. So the way these transactions are structured, particularly the equity derivative trades, there'll usually be a series of different trades that are all based around the ownership of those listed shares as the reference assets. And in the case of a collar, for instance, there'll be the sale of a call option and also the purchase of a put option, and with the proceeds from that sale of the call option. And simultaneously, the parties will enter into a securities lending agreement. These all have cash advance features as well, which enable the monetization of those shares. I should point out that this should all be done. This is all typically done in accordance with the relevant listed companies, policies for trading on their own shares. But the key point to remember here, and the key factor that I'm coming back to that's made these types of transactions successful, is that an investment bank or financial institution is typically going to be the counterparty to these collars or these forwards. And this is where the BVI business company becomes a very popular tool here. Vicky's obviously already spoken about the asset protection options that are available for through the BVI different products. It's already an attractive place for these types of high net worth individuals, and typically the founders and directors will hold their shares in these listed companies through a BVI entity, and so it'll be a BVI entity that'll be entering into these collars and these forwards. And so I think the key factors in making this type of founder transaction a commercial success is, again, that modern and commercial legislative regime in the BVI, particularly in the insolvency law provisions. I've already spoken about the BVI Business Companies Act, but if you take the netting regime that's set out in the BVI Insolvency Act, it expressly states that where an agreement provides for the netting off of or the setting off of money or obligations between two parties, in the event of the insolvency of one of those parties, then those netting provisions will be enforceable against each other party. That provides a lot of certainty for participants in the derivatives and the margin loan space, particularly in times of perceived volatility. And it's what enables banks to enter into these types of transactions with a founder, with a director of a listed company who wants to monetize some value from those shares that they might, without having to sell those shares. So that's been a really successful type of business transaction we've seen in the past 2 years.
Great, thank you, Paul. So just comparing to maybe other IFCs, so if the founder shares were held in a different type of company rather than this BVI company that you mentioned, they may not be able to get access to that type of liquidity from a lenders. Could that be?
Yeah, I think a combination of things. The points that Vicky made about that asset protection already drive this type of high net worth individual into a BVI company as it is, which is fantastic because of those protections that are there. But equally, the netting arrangements that exist that are very clear, that approve the enforceability of those netting provisions in the event of an insolvency, they're not going to be unwound. It provides a lot of certainty for participants on either side. So yes, the BVI, the fact that a high net worth individual, a founder, a director, uses BVI entities certainly promotes and makes available that monetization option.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a very practical, example for people who are on the course who are thinking, where should I, if I'm setting up a structure for my client, where should the founder shares be held, which jurisdiction? And obviously having that monetization benefit of using BVI is very useful. I'd like to move on to our next point. We still have a few more questions before we wrap up today. How does the BVI IFC promote sustainable business practices and ESG integration amongst Chinese businesses? And what initiatives have been implemented in this regard?
Again, yeah, I think this is a really important point. The last few years have seen a really big surge in investor demand for companies to focus on their ESG principles. They want to invest. Investors are looking at increasingly working with partners who share their ESG values, and that's really, really important. A lot of this has been taking place in North America and Europe, but we are starting to see this now in Asia. The Hong Kong government has just issued a green bond that was issued in triple currency and raised about $5.8 billion at the beginning of this year. It is something that is taking root in Asia and will continue to do so. There have been big volumes of green bond issuances throughout the COVID years as well. But I think here the key point is the existing infrastructure already permits permits the BVI structures to be utilised and for BVI companies to lead the way on ESG financings. These points have been raised before, but I've spoken about the purposes and the objects which a BVI business company can be incorporated. They can be either unlimited or they can be very, very restricted. But the fact that you've got the ability to tailor these means that they're prime for ensuring that the purpose and objects of a company can be tailored for an ESG or a green initiative, and sustainable practices. And that's really important to note for investor demand as well. Importantly, there's also no disclosure requirements imposed under BVI law in respect of offering documents. That enables a BVI company to really follow world best practice, world leading practice when it comes to ESG standards that might be updated or changed. They can follow those and be very, very flexible and nimble as developments in that space take place. And again, I think, in these types of ESG financings and arrangements, the BVI offers a tax neutral, low cost and flexible vehicle in a jurisdiction which many other jurisdictions and investors from those jurisdictions are already comfortable with. And so it really is primed to be a vehicle that's used in these types of arrangements, which is excellent news.
Wonderful. Thank you for that very comprehensive overview. And I was wondering, is there anyone else that wants to comment on this next point before we move on to our next?
Yeah. Yes, Matthew. If I just follow on from what Paul has just mentioned, I mean, for us in particular, it's very salient to see that the ESG scene have definitely moved from international arena to Asia, and particularly China. And it's borne out in the work that we've done in the past decade. In the past few years, there's a lot more China-related ESG projects, whether it's kind of loan financing or whether it's bond issuance. And indeed, it's perfect timing for BVI to tap into the kind of growing PRC green market, because in the past 10 years or so, it's very much grown and driven by central government policies. For example, the People's Bank of China, which is kind of like, Chinese central bank, did issue guidelines relating to green financing, for instance, in the form of special guarantee programs and some interest rate subsidies, principles that apply to green projects. Their listing rules also have been amended to reflect some ESG related guidelines and thresholds. So all in all, that it's definitely tremendous opportunities in the Chinese market in this area. And for all the reasons that we've just gone through, BVI is well positioned to assist all the Chinese business to grow the ESG work.
Great. Thank you very much for that addition, Fiona. Moving quickly on to our next point, what are some of the, or what measures have been, has the BVI IFC taken over the years to strengthen its relationships with Chinese officials and financial institutions to enhance its appeal as a preferred IFC for Chinese businesses? Vicky, I think you were going to handle this one. Yeah,
sure. I think Ellie's already spoken to the memorandum of understanding, and obviously that deep history with BVI government having brought people to China to do the road shows, to interact and really to follow through on that. I think from a financial institutions perspective, the Insolvency Act and the Commercial Court, that access that you have to a creditor-friendly jurisdiction and the arbitration centre has really meant that the financial institutions can place a lot of confidence when dealing with a BVI company, and that has always, it's been there for a significant period of time. It's continued to be developed and continue to provide that certainty and that that access to the courts for insolvency, which is quick and easy, and really gives financial institutions the confidence to be able to transact. So that's what I would say in relation to kind of the strengthening of relationships with financial institutions that BVI has undertaken.
Great, and I'd like to.
Sorry, can I just chip in a point on that? I think confidence is a really excellent point, Vicky, and for me, when I look at the BVI as a jurisdiction and look at the relation, speak to our client bankers, we use this phrase creditor-friendly jurisdiction all the time. I'm fairly sure that all of us on the call overuse it all of the time. But it's very fair to say that the BVI is unique in being a stable and isolated, completely neutral microstate that it's just simply so dependent on offshore business. 60 cents in the dollar of revenue, our GDP physically here in the BVI, come from financial services. And China is responsible for 44% of that. Okay, that makes any significant or adverse change in our laws absolutely unthinkable. And I would say that the Chinese financial institutions can take significant comfort from that.
That's a very good point. Those are some pretty startling numbers, and but in a good way. And I would also add to that, if we just want to talk about level of confidence, Chinese state-owned enterprises, in terms of their holding structures, have even chosen the BVI. So if you look in the chart of the Bank of China in terms of its its organizational structure chart, there's BVI entities within the Bank of China's structure. So if you want to talk about a vote of confidence, or the closeness and the connectivity between the two states, I think that's a pretty clear indicator that China has confidence in BVI and vice versa. So that's those are wonderful points to bring up for those people on the call. I want to quickly move into our next point, and then we have one final one before we close. How is the BVI IFC leveraging technology and digital innovation, especially as a jurisdiction which is geographically far, from China? That's very important. And let's also talk about fintech, digital asset management, and e-commerce. How has BVI leveraged technology and improved its services to Chinese businesses in this space? I believe, Fiona, you were going to handle that.
Yes, thanks, Matthew. And I'm really glad that this question came up, because the way I see it, fintech is really the area that BVI can really tap into and really grow progressively, because that's just the future of all the industries or businesses. Now, the BVI in particular has always been looking for ways to improve its legal regulatory framework, which is a key consideration for businesses in a kind of tech industry. Stability is what they're looking for, as well as protection of their own businesses in this kind of volatile market. I'm not going to go through all the points that we have just discussed about, BVI having a good structure or in terms of corporate governance and everything, but just focusing on fintech. The first thing to mention is that BVI really wants to focus to be the technology hub internationally, and it has passed the related digital asset legislation, which is called the Virtual Asset Service Providers Act, which came into force, I think, in February this year. Now, it is a legislation which provides a licensing regime for businesses engaged in issuing tokens, managing, controlling, safekeeping, exchange or transfer or whatnot in relation to digital assets. And this particularly reflects the growing number of Chinese businesses using BVI entities as holding and operating companies across the technology industry. The piece of legislation, I'm not going to go into details, but basically the way I see it is that it does not overly regulate the tech space, but it does offer a sufficient level of control and oversight, particularly to retail investors, pursuant to the licensing regime and all the related kind of AML requirements. And the BVI has also very helpfully launched a fintech sandbox since 2020, which encouraged technological innovations for financial services. And it really has become an attractive kind of crypto destination, because it can kind of balance the innovation with an appropriate regulatory landscape. And we do have some real life examples, that we can kind of showcase the BVI's expertise. For example, we have ChainSwap, which is a BVI incorporated company that provides for sort of like cross-chain bridging, which in short is the process of synthetically transferring cryptocurrencies tokens between different blockchains. This company was unfortunately hacked twice in July 2021. But it managed to seek some urgent ex parte relief from the BVI courts in an attempt to recoup some of the stolen assets. So in the first kind of judgment in the BVI, the court granted a worldwide freezing order against the persons, which actually was unknown to, but this unknown person accused of stealing the digital assets. Now, this shows the court's willingness to assist victims of crypto fraud and in a way provide a level of comfort to crypto businesses. And in addition, last year, the BVI Financial Services Commission granted an investment business license to a subsidiary of Harneys. Harneys, as some of you might know, is one of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. So a license was granted to a subsidiary, BWL, which can now operate a virtual assets exchange. And it is the first digital asset trading platform operator in a BVI licensed to run a more institutional grades crypto trading platform. So that is for both professional and retail investors. Now, all this together kind of demonstrate the commitment of the BVI government to really become the champion in innovative technology and an attractive crypto destination for Chinese businesses, and I suppose indeed businesses around the world as well.
That was very comprehensive, Fiona. Thank you for that. I won't add any, further comments, but I think in summary, the digital asset space, cryptocurrencies, exchanges, etc., obviously very hot. It's been through multiple bear and bull cycles, and it's great to see that leading international financial centers like BVI continue to update its legislation and provide a platform for innovative entrepreneurs who want to expand in this space to do business in a friendly but well-regulated environment. So thank you for explaining that so thoroughly, Fiona. The last question is, what challenges and opportunities does the BVI IFC foresee in its engagement with Chinese businesses in the coming years? And how do you think the BVI is preparing to address these developments? And Fiona, I think you're going to answer this one as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are a lot of different angles we can answer in relation to these questions, but I just want to follow on really from the fintech point, which I think is important. The challenge or the opportunity at the same time is how the BVI can develop beyond simply collaborating with other jurisdictions to offer service to Chinese businesses, to where they can really provide a one-stop shop service. So the tech examples is that, at the moment, it's not uncommon to see fintech businesses using a mixture of Jersey or Cayman or BVI structures. Like, for example, they may use a Cayman or Jersey foundations together with a BVI company being the issuer in a DAO transaction, which is DAO as in DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. Now, this becomes very popular in the past few years in the crypto space. And this kind of offshore structure is, I would say, counted more than half of the current DAO structures in the offshore market. Now, but I see there's a vast potential for the BVI to actually evolve to provide all the services and, in terms of all the structurings, domiciling and financing of the fintech businesses. And that would really appeal to China, China crypto businesses, because they have already been so familiar and attracted to the BVI based on, all the reasons that we've just gone through. So from a legal and regulatory perspective, BVI is really well positioned to become a tech center. And so we're going to really see this as a real opportunity for the BVI to further grow the market share and be a leading kind of center IFC in the world.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Fiona. And we are at the end of the allotted time for the webinar today. So I'm certain all the practitioners on the call from mainland China, everyone being very, very time sensitive with our busy schedules. Does anyone want to add any final comments before we close for the day? Okay, I think and one other point, and I realized this while I was just listening to your responses, is I know each one of your firms, and I know that you have offices in dozens of jurisdictions around the world. And so I think the thing that I can take from that is, while you said all positive things about the BVI, on this call being a, BVI IFC hosted webinar, but so much of what you said was very practical, from real life experience of what your experience has been with actually working with BVI courts or the registry, in dealing with stakeholders who own BVI entities, and the response and the support that you're able to give and that the jurisdiction has given back. And so having that level of positivity, I think, but also neutrality, because your firms, have offices in so many jurisdictions in the world, it should give those people, the people on the call, that the authenticity and the, legitimate views that you're giving based on, the choice of so many jurisdictions out there, but still having so many great things to say about BVI, and the fact that, again, I'm in Europe right now. We have people in China, Shanghai, and in BVI, and literally, this is one of the most global webinars I think I've ever been on, and we have Chinese speaking, practitioners on all time zones of the world who can, support those stakeholders with BVI entities. And in my own personal experience of working with BVI IFC, I've personally hosted the premiere of BVI twice in mainland China. Of all the different countries in the world that BVI entities or stakeholders with BVI entities, reside, the head of the state has come out and physically, been in the room with the practitioners on the ground who serve the Chinese families, who serve the Chinese publicly listed companies, and sit down and have dialogue about, what does the jurisdiction need to do to support you? How can we be more relevant? How can we, stay ahead of what you're facing in your businesses, so that we can continue to support you, as we have done for the past, 3 decades. How can we support you into, the 2020s and beyond? And those are real conversations that I've seen, happen firsthand, with the head of the state, the head of the, the head of the BVI IFC, obviously practitioners like yourselves. And I think that's that constant evolution, even under all the, all the pressure that's out there from regulatory and international bodies, that continue to support the continued evolution of the jurisdiction, gives a lot of confidence to continue to choose BVI in times of uncertainty, or in times of, in times of uncertainty. So thank you all for taking the time to share your insights with the audience today. I know that there was a few questions, but we're already 10 minutes over, so we have collected those. And if there's individual responses that we need from you guys, we'll share those out to you privately. And I will discuss with BVI IFC, but I'm sure it would be fine for you guys if there's your contacts shared with those participants on the call today. So if there are business inquiries or people need support with BVI structures, that they can reach out to you individually and get that. So thank you, everyone. And I'd like to say thank you to BVI IFC for hosting this webinar. It's been a pleasure to speak with you all and hear your individual insights. So thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Fiona, for taking the time. And a virtual round of applause, as we're not in person. Yeah.
Thanks,
hopefully,
everyone.
And for everyone just who's on this call, BVI IFC will be with us at the Asia Outbound Summit, previously known as the China Offshore Summit, in November later this year. And there may be a delegation planned out to the Far East for BVI's anniversary, BVI House anniversary. So please stay tuned. So you'll have another chance or 2 chances to meet BVI practitioners, BVI IFC, and hopefully, even more stately delegation in the time coming. So stay tuned. There's a lot more coming from BVI. And in the meantime, you can reach out to your Outbound Investment Group representatives if you need to be connected with any practitioner in the BVI. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matthew.